After receiving the wound, the garbage can monster was forced to return back to Po and recover. The guys found themselves on the ground surrounded by other vampires and understood that the battle was not over yet. Considering that it is too dangerous for Po to remain among such monsters and he will not be able to do anything, the guys offer him to run away, and they will distract the attention of the vampires and fight. Kazuro and Han, standing with their backs to each other, fight with all their might and do not give the vampires a chance to inflict any damage on them. The guys' sharp blades are capable of cutting through monsters like paper. After such a fight, all the monsters were dead and chopped into pieces. Kazuro and Han stood a little tired and tried to catch their breath, looking around to see if there were any more enemies willing to fight. The bearded monster with the pipe felt that these two were much stronger than those four weaklings from the bank building, and decided to see if they could amuse him with a worthy battle and opposition to his magic. He inhales smoke from the pipe and releases it, forming a huge cloud of smoke. His ability was dangerous and hid everything that fell into the smoke. Kazuro and Han, seeing how they were enveloped in a thick smog of tobacco smoke, began to cough and try to collect themselves and not allow themselves to be attacked from their blind spots. Kazuro covered his mouth with one hand, trying to breathe, and was ready, looking in all directions. Khan stood behind and carefully tried to sense the enemy presence and act proactively. Kajuro begins to sense the enemy's presence using his red eye and tries to quickly turn around and attack the enemy. His confident actions were fueled by his phantom swordsman abilities and red eye skill, preventing his opponent from catching him by surprise. The bearded monster gets hit with a sword and is very surprised that the guy could see him in such a thick fog of cigarette smoke. He doesn't understand how this is possible. Kajuro looked at the bearded monster and showed his disgust for smokers. His eye glowed red, and the monster realized that this was the ability of one of the monsters, and all attempts to attack from an unexpected direction would be stopped. In an attempt to finish off the bearded monster, Kajuro holds out his sword, but the monster quickly disappears in a thick cloud of smoke. The guys continued to stand and control the approach of the enemy. Suddenly, the monster appears from above and tries to pierce Han's neck with his pipe, realizing that it is too early for him to interfere with Kazuro and tries to leave him alone. But Khan manages to dodge the attack of a bearded monster with a pipe using his fighting skills. The monster was very surprised here too, because all his attacks were even and did not cause damage to the guys. After dodging, Khan delivers a strong blow to the bearded monster's neck, and he begins to fall. His eyes showed great surprise and fear that he might lose to some students and even inexperienced absorbers. From the wound he received, the bearded monster, barely able to stay on his feet, tries to get away and heal his wound by resorting to magic. Khan, having dealt damage, tries not to lose sight of the enemy and monitors his movements. The monster was very surprised that the other guy was able to dodge hidden attacks and realized that he had underestimated the enemy and was in vain to attack mindlessly. Khan looked at the bearded monster, and using his sense of detecting mana, he could easily see the enemy without even making visual contact. Now the smoke began to clear, and Kajuro and Han prepared to fight and looked at the bearded smoker with contempt and looked quite dangerous. The bearded monster with a cigar gets a little scared and decides to try to retreat. Having received several minor injuries, the bearded monster, pointing his finger at the guys, was extremely annoyed that they dared to come to his city and kill his monsters. A cloud of smoke begins to form under the feet of the bearded monster, and the monster, holding his wounded neck, tries to threaten the guys that a crowd of monsters will soon come to them and kill them. Rising into the sky, he no longer worried, because here he was out of reach of the enemy and calmly watched the guys, showing his superiority over them. Kazuro and Han watched the monster, and realized that he could really go for help, and then they would definitely not be able to cope with a large number of monsters. Nada had to do something, but at such a height, none of the attacks would have reached her. Kajuro remembers his newly upgraded red eye skill, and decides to attack the bearded monster with the explosive tag of the red eye ability. The bearded monster notices that a symbol appears on his hand and begins to blink strongly. This confuses him and leaves him bewildered. His hand explodes, flying to the side, and the monster, spitting out his pipe, begins to scream in pain and understands that he must leave here. Experiencing hellish pain, the The bearded monster will no longer be able to heal the wound and will forever lose his arm. The pain was severe, and the only thought in my head was to quickly get to the head of the monsters of this city and tell him about what happened. In the meantime, the guys did not stand idle, but decided to return to the bank and, while they had time, try to find the vault and check if there was money there. Having found the vault, the guys stood and watched as a monster with a chainsaw tried to cut the hinges with its saw and open the armored door. Everyone was excited and didn't know what to expect. The hinges were cut off and the door began to fall from its weight, raising a cloud of dust. The monster with the chainsaw stood and turned off his saw. The room was dark and it was hard to see where anything was. But in one corner one could see a huge stack of money stacked on top of each other, and nearby were gold bars. These riches have been untouched for so many years, since no one managed to get here due to the large number of monsters in the area. The guys' faces were filled with happiness, and a lot of thoughts about what to spend such huge money on. Khan was already dreaming of how he could buy himself a huge stone from the strongest monster and absorb its powers, becoming much stronger. Poe dreamed of tasting the most delicious dishes from all over the world. The guys hugged a bunch of money and were blinded by happiness. Now they had to deliver such a lot of money home and divide it among themselves. Kajuro was happy because there was enough money to pay for Hanami's mother's treatment and even for a long and happy life. Calling for a trash can, he opened the lid and began to throw all the money and gold that they found in the bank into it, rejoicing and dancing a little with happiness. The trash can looked at the happy guys and was a little perplexed. Meanwhile, a bearded monster with a pipe arrived at the house of the head of the city and, holding his severed hand, tried to run and tell the ruler about what had happened. A monster in an office suit and gold jewelry was already standing there, discussing the further development of their city. Having lost enough strength and blood, the bearded monster falls to the floor in front of the ruler, emitting sounds of pain and weakness. The lord and the monster in the suit were surprised, and they were very interested in what happened to one of the leaders of the army of the lord of the city. The bearded monster, holding his hand, said that he came across two guys who were very strong and had strong fighting skills. They were capable of killing a monster like me, the bearded man said. The monster in the suit, smiling about the failure of his comrade, decides to try to stop and finish off those two guys himself. The lord listened, sipped a glass of wine on his sofa, and wondered how his general could lose the battle to some two brats who had not even seen life yet. Having listened to the proposal of the monster in a suit and gold jewelry about the desire to deal with those boys himself, the ruler agrees and asks him not to make such stupid mistakes as his comrade. While our guys were filling the trash can with money and gold bars, smiling and having fun, not thinking about what awaited them outside the walls of the bank, various noises began to appear on the street and increased with every second. While Kazuro and Han were condemning their assumptions about what to spend money on as more important and priority, Poe notices that it became somehow noisy on the street, and he began to take a closer look. Having seen in the window that there were a lot of monsters on the street in front of the entrance, he begins to tell the guys to stop arguing and look at what awaits them behind the doors. The whole street was littered with different monsters, and it was very dangerous to go out. The guys began to take a closer look and saw that they had no chance if they decided to take a break. Kazuro and the guys stood in the lobby of the bank and saw how a huge crowd of monsters simply walked in front of the entrance, but did not enter. They began to suspect that this was the work of that bearded monster who fled after the battle. Poe was so scared that he thought he would have to spend the rest of his life in a jar without food or water. He was scared, and he felt sorry that instead of escaping from the city, they decided to rob a bank and fell into a trap. Kajuro began to calm down. Poe and an interesting thought appeared in his head. They can escape without attracting attention only if the monsters do not see them. That is, if they are inside the monster. Poe immediately understood and summoned the garbage can monster, telling him that they must climb into it and go through the huge army of hungry and angry monsters that were waiting for them on the street. Having opened the lid of the tank, the guys took turns climbing inside, simultaneously trying not to damage the money that they so badly wanted to get. Only the monster with the trash can try to leave the bank, trying not to attract attention. How two monsters stop him, not allowing him to pass, The trash can monster was a little scared and tried to behave naturally for a monster. The scarred dead man's monster asks the trash can why he never saw him in their overlord army. The guys inside tried to sit quietly and not make any sounds. Kajuro, realizing that the trash can is starting to get stupid, tries to give him advice and tell him that he was transferred from another army. The monster follows the words of the trash can and no longer blocks the path. The trash can is still standing and smiling awkwardly, trying not to give himself away. Suddenly, the comrade of the monster with the skull who stopped the garbage can begins to get angry and say that he is fed up with everything and wants to eat normal human meat. The monster with the skull, listening to the complaints of his comrade, decides to throw the skull of the corpse into the trash can. He still has a few human habits left. Having opened the tank, he begins to smell a strong smell of people. The trash can's ability to hide the power within itself was disrupted by the discovery, and all the monsters could smell a person nearby. The monster begins to shout at the trash can with the words where the human smell comes from and begins to attract attention to itself. The trash can monster begins to get very worried and says that he recently ate a person and maybe the smell is left from him. The monster does not believe that such a monster could kill a person and suspects that he is being deceived. Suddenly, a hand comes out of the trash can and grabs the monster by the neck. The monster was very surprised and did not have time to say or do anything. Kazuro grabs the monster by the neck and pushes it into a trash can and prevents them from being given away among the crowd of monsters. The garbage can monster himself did not expect that a monster would be thrown into it and was a little scared. Grabbing the monster and preventing it from moving, Khan delivers a precise blow and cuts off the monster's head. Having gotten rid of the monster, the guys began to bide their time so that no one else would suspect their monster. Meanwhile, in the neighboring area, the game of dice was in full swing. A talented and cunning player very often won and left no chance for his opponent. It was a monster in an office suit and gold jewelry. His strength was gambling, and he played the game of dice for a living. His addiction from his past life made him a very strong and capable monster. The guys who played with the monster for a living understood that they could not kill such a powerful monster. Their group leader decided to play and could not win. He is very frightened, since now he must die and understands this. The teammates, without having time to understand anything, see how their comrade's head explodes and fills everything with blood. They stood in horror and did not know what to do or how to escape. The monster in the suit started screaming for the other guy to play with him for his life too. They played on the hood of an old car near an office building. The guy refuses to play, explaining that he doesn't like gambling. Crying heavily and begging to let them go, the guy gradually begins to move backwards. The gambling monster did not appreciate the guy's answer and mercilessly threw the dice at the boy's head, smiling angrily. His head also shattered, and only one frightened girl remained. She, crying, tried to beg the monster to let her go because she did not want to die. The monster says that there is only one way to leave, and that is to play. When rolling the dice, the girl had 1 point less than the monster with the gold jewelry. She realized that it was all over and, trying to survive, still begged the monster to let her go. The monster mercilessly throws a dice into the girl's throat and thereby kills her. She, feeling severe pain, cried one last time and began to fall. A monster in a suit with a large golden chain ridicules such weak absorbers who could not even fight him, but immediately tried to beg for their miserable life through a game in which he has no equal. After killing the entire group of students, the monster in the suit begins to walk away smiling contentedly. Now he was heading towards the bank, where his fellow bearded monster was beaten by 2 pathetic scavengers. Meanwhile, other monsters were wandering around the trash can and trying to figure out where that human smell came from. They were dumb and didn't bother other monsters. The guys opened the lid to the permissible height and watched, waiting for the opportunity to leave the dangerous area. Khan began to panic and think that they would not be able to leave. There were too many monsters around and they would have to sit here for too long. Kajuro notices the intense apprehension on Han's face. His trembling voice was full of disappointment, and Kajuro began to try to calm his comrade, while the guys sat in the garbage can monster and tried to calm down from fear. Loud and terrifying laughter was heard on the street. Crocodile leather shoes with gold accents pointed towards the tank. While the guys tried to calm down and behave quietly, without giving away their presence. A monster in a suit and gold jewelry approached the trash can and opened the lid, greeting the guys. Seeing that they had been discovered, the guys prepared to attack, but the monster said that he was not going to kill them and asked them to leave. A monster in a suit, smiling slyly, offers to play dice with the guys. As a reward for victory, he will let them go and will not kill them. Having laid out his sets of dice, he smiled and offered to choose the one who would be the first to want to play with him. He knew that the guys had no chance since he had never lost. Without showing his fear, Kojuro clarifies what the rules are in his game and what will happen if they lose. A monster in a suit and gold jewelry shows his skill and invincibility in the game of dice, and some boy is no match for him. Kojuro behaved very defiantly, and his comrades were frightened by such actions. They sensed the strong aura of the monster in the suit and began to worry. Kojuro agreed to willingly play with the monster. The monster in the suit was pleased and rejoiced that without much effort, he could kill the arrogant boys who dared to tear off his comrade's hand. Kojuro and the monster each took a bowl of dice and began shaking them, wanting to knock out the highest number possible. Kojuro was cunning and did not agree to lose so easily. A monster with a very cunning face prepared to lay out his stones. It was a very dangerous and insidious monster. Kojuro felt that he couldn't win honestly and decided to come up with something. The bones of the monster in the suit were laid out on the table. The number was the maximum possible. This combination of numbers was very suspicious, and Kojuro sensed it. Han and Po, seeing that the monster had the maximum number, were very frightened and understood that even if Kojuro knocked out the same number, they would still lose. The monster began to tell the boy to roll the dice and find out the result. Kojuro continued to shuffle the dice and tell the monster that he still didn't lose because he didn't throw the dice, which means he had to wait. Kojuro wasn't going to roll the dice until he was sure he could distract the monster's attention and roll the number he wanted. The monster was already very angry and felt that the boy was only stalling for time and was not going to roll the dice. Kojuro, realizing that the time has come, decides to roll the dice. Having thrown the bones onto the ground, everyone began to look with a surprised face at what fell on Kozuro's bones. After such anger, the monster saw that the boy finally threw stones and also decides to see what the guy got. Everyone was surprised and even shocked that one of the bones was broken in half. The number rolled is one higher than that of the monster in the suit. The monster in the suit, seeing that the guy had a higher number, fell into depression and kneeling down began to scream from failure. Kojuro smiling that he was able to defeat the monster in his favorite game and taking advantage of the opportunity and giving his word that he would let them go. Kojuro told his comrades to hurry up and get out of here before the monster came to its senses. Khan, unable to bear the misunderstanding, decides to ask Kojuro how it happened with the stones. Kojuro explained as they walked that by using his red eye skills, he could always see which stones were falling out, and using a magic blade, he would quietly cut the bone in half. The guys, hearing how Kojuro had unleashed that strong monster, began to laugh and run away. The background was dark streets and old cracked houses. After walking around the old town for a short time, Kojuro decides to look at the map and see which way the exit from the city is. The guys notice a huge monster in a swimsuit rushing towards them. Behind him was a bull monster in a suit who was also chasing them. The boys wasted no time jumping into the trash can monster. A monster in a swimsuit hits a trash can monster at great speed, which flies off a huge distance. After a strong impact, the garbage can begins to fall down the slope of the street, rolling along the road. The guys inside were also annoyed by this situation. After so many somersaults and hits against the walls of the tank, Po begins to feel sick, and he screams that he is going to throw up. Khan tries his best to hold on, and also begins to feel bad. The slope of the street was very long, and the guys only got worse. The monster in the swimsuit was breathing heavily and angrily as he watched the trash can roll down. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the dark underground parking lot, and strange sounds were coming from there. The doll monster, with the help of its magic, looked quite dangerous and, controlling the abilities of others, took itself by the throat. The monsters, under the influence of the doll's abilities, began to beat each other, unable to resist such strong body control magic. Yui, controlling her doll monster with control skills, easily killed two high-level monsters. After killing the monsters, Yui absorbed her monster doll back. She killed monsters, but felt little pity for her actions. After the death of the two monsters, the rest of the group runs up to Yui, happy that she protected them from such powerful monsters. Unexpectedly for them, a garbage can monster flies into the parking lot and crashes into a pole. Everyone was surprised and a little frightened by the unexpected appearance of the monster. Kojuro and his friends climbed out of the open trash can. Money and gold bars also spilled out of the tank. Yui and the other students stood surprised that they were still alive. Some of Yuya's group, seeing that the boys were with a lot of money, offered to kill them and take the loot for themselves. The guys began to come to their senses and, having recovered, noticed that they had fallen into an underground parking lot, and Yui and other students were standing in front of them. Kojuro felt bad, and wiping his mouth, began to raise his eyes. Kazuro notices that these are the same guys who attacked him in a dark alley after the fight with Tsuyuki's brother Fen. These scum were mercenaries and students of the Mao-Chi Supreme Devourers University. The guy with glasses suggests attacking and not hesitating. Yui stops them, saying that this is not the right time and it is not worth making a fuss and fighting just yet. There are still too many monsters around. Kazuro, having recovered from the strong shakes and impacts of the garbage can, notices that there were a lot of stones around, and this interested him greatly. Kazuro and the guys started collecting stones and were glad that they had the opportunity to improve their skills. Yui approached them and began to say that these were their stones, and they should not take them. Kazuro saw Yui. He was very unhappy and angry. He will never forgive her family for hurting the Hanami family. Kojuro said that he would never follow or listen to her, and he was not interested in her opinion. Yui, having once again heard insults directed at herself, was very angry, but was going to do nothing with Kojuro. Her friends, hearing the guy's words, decide to cheer up their friend Yui and take her away, saying that he is not worthy to help them. Turning around, she agrees not to accept them into her group and leaves in disappointment. The friends and Tsuyuki, looking back at Kojuro's bad deeds, leave. The blonde leader of the mercenaries who attacked Kazuro only grinned and showed his contempt for Kazuro and hoped that he would die in agony. Kojuro, showing complete disrespect and remembering that he tried to kill him, showed his middle finger and stuck out his tongue. Yui and her comrades decided to leave the dungeon and go outside to find a way out of the old city. When they went outside, they stopped and were very scared. Feeling a strong smell and a burning sensation in the eyes from tear gas, they were very frightened by what they saw. Yui closed her nose and squinted her eyes and froze at the difficult situation. In front of them stood a huge pile of strong monsters with their leaders of the strongest rank. One of the generals had the ability to make explosives and, playing with his dynamite sticks, was preparing to throw them into the crowd. Yui, realizing that the enemy is outnumbered and everyone's power level is too high to fight. She asks everyone to run as quickly as possible. Trying to break away from the crowd of monsters, Yui jumps out from around the corner at high speed, trying to control the others so that they do not lag behind. All the guys are very scared and try to keep up with Yui. Yui stops, realizing that they cannot escape, and understands that they must give battle to the enemy. The guys behind were very scared and did not believe that they could defeat so many monsters. Yui begins to summon her monster doll, hoping to defeat her enemies and give her the opportunity to break away from the pursuit. The guys understand that they really have no choice and will go on to fight. The guys begin to summon their monsters to fight. A monster with dynamite sticks decides to attack the kids and not give them the opportunity to escape. The monster laughed evilly and mocked the weak people, saying that they could not cope with him. From the explosives, the guys were scattered on both sides of the street. From strong explosions and loud screams, the guys could be heard quite far away. The guys were shrouded in smoke and did not see the enemy in the thick smoke. Another monster also wanted to take part in the fight and jumps into the fog with great pleasure. A blonde guy found himself in dense and thick smoke, that someone was watching him and began to suspect that someone wanted to attack him. The blonde guy instructs his monster to check who is behind him and attack him. This is a very serious situation, and the fight will be difficult. It was a guy with glasses. he was very scared and shouted to the fair-haired guy that this was his friend. Don't attack him with a monster. The blond man relaxed a little and looked back, where he saw the same guy with glasses who was lying on the ground from his injuries. It was a fatal mistake, and the blond guy realizes that it was a monster in the guise of his friend. But he realizes this too late, and the monster tears out his heart with his bare hands. His body falls lifelessly to the ground with a large hole in his body. At that moment, Kajuro and his comrades heard loud explosions and came out to see what was happening. Kazuro sees that Yuya's group is fighting monsters and has already lost several guys. Kajuro watches with great surprise as those guys fight very strong monsters. Khan is also surprised and offers to help them or retreat. One of the guys notices that his friend was killed by a monster with the ability to change his appearance, and everyone needs to be careful. Some guys heard that there is a monster that can copy their appearance and began to suspect each other. The monster, seeing that there is discord in the team, decides to act. Throwing a saber at the quarreling guys, there was an explosion. Several guys were killed and blown apart by the explosion of the monster's explosive checker. Upon seeing a strong explosion, he begins to suggest that something should be done, or those guys will not survive. Kajuro thought about it, but understood that everyone in that group wanted him dead. Kajuro notices that there was a strong aura behind them, and he notices that there is a monster behind them that has been watching them all this time. This was a girl of the highest level. Her robe resembled eggshells, but was made of ice. The girl herself exuded a strong aura of water magic. She notices that the boys have noticed her and are preparing to do something. The girl doubted the strength of those guys and looked down on them. Kajuro and the guys decide to attack the monster's girl, not allowing him to take them by surprise. Khan prepared his blade and ran with the desire to kill the ice monster. Khan, using shadow magic, summons his monster with a scythe. He ran with a confident face and a willingness to win and show his strength to be able to face a monster of this level. The ice monster decides to use its ice breath and stop the guys. Kajuro, using the skills of his red eye, manages to dodge and jump away. Han and Po did not have time and fell into the trap of the ice monster. Han and Po are trapped in ice and are trying to get out and pry their feet off the ice. Po began to get very worried and try with all his might to escape, wanting to survive and not die in this abandoned city. Kajuro, jumping back, realizes that his comrades are trapped, and he urgently needs to stop this monster and prevent him from killing them. Kajuro decides to use the red eye skill and slow down the ice monster for a while. The ability could affect such a strong monster for a very short time, but this would be enough to strike. The ice monster, feeling the strong influence of the red eye, tries to resist. She was very strong and capable of blocking attacks from weaker monsters. Kajuro, without hesitation, tries to hit the ice monster while it was under the influence of the red eye skill. Kajuro swung his magic sword. A strong blow should have caused large wounds to the ice monster and stopped it. Kajuro hoped that he could stop the monster. The strong blow left no trace on the ice monster's body. Kazuro realized that he needed to change the strategy and, probably thanks to his ice armor, the blow did not go through. Kajuro decides to use the explosive gaze skill and see if it works on her. If this does not work, then there will be little chance of salvation. The monster notices how a magical seal begins to form on her body and blink violently. She was afraid that this ability was strong and did not have time to react to it. The explosion threw the ice monster aside and hit the wall. The monster was stronger than that bearded man and did not receive colossal injuries. After hitting the wall hard, she held her stomach and was in severe pain. It was the first time she had experienced the pain of fighting a human. While the ice monster was trying to recover from such an attack, Kajuro decided to take advantage of the moment and call on his monsters to help the guys get out. A monster with a chainsaw and a warrior in golden armor tried to pull out Han and Po using their weapons. The warrior in golden armor was not happy that he was called to save people and not fight a monster. Kazuro told his comrades to get ready and quickly get out of here. Kazuro understood that they would hardly be able to cope against such strong monsters. While the guys were running, Kazuro felt someone grab his left leg. He got a little scared and thought it was a monster. Turning around, Kazuro sees how the monsters grabbed the legs of some girl and began to eat them. High-rank monsters are quite dangerous, but they haven't paid attention to the guys yet. It was a girl from Yui's group, and experiencing terrible pain from eating her legs, she begged Kajuro to help her and save her. Kazuro saw that the girl had very little chance, and from the injuries she had received, she would not last long. Making a very difficult decision, Kazuro refuses to be saved. Kajuro gets out of the girl's hand and continues to run. The girl screams in despair and begs for help after the guys. Trying to ignore the screams of the dying students, Kajuro and his comrades began to run as fast as they could and get as far away from this area as possible. Yui shouts to the others that they should run away too and turns around. She sees her comrades being killed by monsters right before her eyes. One of the guys is punched by a monster with horns and impaled on the horns. Yui and Tsuyuki, seeing their comrades being killed, decide to quickly run away, shouting to the others who survived to follow them. Meanwhile, Kajuro and his comrades ran as fast as they could, trying to escape and find a way out of the abandoned city. Kajuro notices that Po is running too fast and it's not like him. Just recently he couldn't run at all, but here it is. Kajuro hesitates and decides to say that his phone broke when they fell and he no longer has Sarah's number. Po, running, said that he did not have time for this now. Khan also realized this and, using his blade, strikes the monster in the form. Then they stop. Kazuro and Han, taking a fighting stance, began to ask who he is and where is the real Po. Po's mask begins to peel off, and the face of a real monster appears underneath it. There was blood coming from his neck, and he didn't understand how the guys were able to figure him out so quickly. Kajuro, taking out his magic blade, stood opposite the monster, and Khan walked around from behind and did not want to give the monster a chance to escape. Khan, standing behind the monster, threatening with his sharp sword and asking where the real Po is. Kajuro was also interested in this, and he was waiting for an answer. The monster was not scared and smiled slyly and clapped his hands. His face showed a strong interest in the further battle, and noticed that the boys were not as simple as they seemed at first glance. After clapping his hands, the monster disappears and puts Kazuro and Han into a state of surprise, and observing the remnants of magical power, they do not understand where it went. Khan felt that a monster had appeared behind him, and using his shadow abilities began to dodge the attack. The monster hits the shadow with its hand, but the boy Khan dodged to the side. The shadow began to grab the monster with its hands and prevent it from escaping. The shadow, blocking the monster's hands in itself, decides to swing its huge and sharp scythe and use a powerful blow on the monster. The blow was very strong, and the monster, with the ability to transform into people using a mask, flies to the side, receiving severe injuries. The monster with the masks fell to the ground, holding on to the large wound that left him a shadow with its sickle blow. The monster was at a loss and understood that he could not cope with them. Kajuro and Han with their monster stood and looked at the wounded monster, asking where the real Po was. The monster, realizing that it is badly wounded, decides to retreat and disappears into a cloud. Han and Kajuro understand that they need to go back and look for Po, since he is their friend and team member. Kazuro really didn't want to do this, but he had no choice. Kazuro and Han ran back, and Yui's group appeared and ran towards them. They were scared and ran as fast as they could. Yui stops Kajuro by saying that it's too dangerous there and they can't run there, otherwise you'll die. Kajuro notices that Yui took his hand. Kajuro pulls his hand out of hers and says that he doesn't care about her opinion and doesn't need to interfere. The girl was surprised and confused that they treated her like that. Kajuro continued to run, and Yui's company stood and looked after them. They didn't understand why the guys were coming back. At the place where there were many opponents and a terrible battle, Kazuro and Han began to look for Po and shout his name. They hoped that the fat man was alive and well. Walking through the mountains of corpses of monsters and people, Han shouted Po's name and looked at everything. Kazuro looked in all directions and also looked for the fat man. After several minutes of searching, Kajuro notices that Po was underneath the large monster's body and was waving at them. Po lay there and told the guys to hurry up, otherwise he was already tired of lying there. Kajuro tells Han that Nada will first make sure it is the real Po. Kajuro says that he is very glad to see the software, but there is bad news and said that his phone was broken in the battle, and now he does not have Sarah's number. Upon hearing that Kajuro no longer had Sarah's number, he was very upset and began to cry and scream in grief. He started punching the ground and cursing all the monsters around him. After a few seconds of hysteria, Po simply fell unconscious and lay under the body, making quiet sounds of disappointment. Kazuro and Han, delighted at this reaction, realized that they had found the real Po and began to run towards him in order to get him from under the monster's body. While the guys were trying to get Po, a huge army of monsters appeared behind them. Kazuro felt a very powerful aura behind his back and froze in fear. These were the monsters that Kajuro had already seen and dealt with. They stood at the head of a crowd of monsters and looked very angry. Kajuro could not restrain himself after seeing so many monsters that he was already very upset and angry that the monsters did not give them peace. He showed them the middle finger and began to insult the monsters for not leaving them behind. While the monsters were arguing with Kazuro and exchanging all sorts of insults, a monster came up from behind and hit the bearded monster and the monster in a suit on the back of the head, thereby catching them by surprise. Turning around from the unexpected blow, they were frightened when they saw their head of the city. He was a very handsome man and dressed in national attire. Waving his fan, the head asked the monsters to calm down and show their manners. This monster exuded a very strong and evil aura. Kazuro had never met such a strong monster before. He was frightening with just his appearance. Kazuro and his comrades stood and realized that even if they used all their monsters, they would not be able to resist such a powerful demon. Kazuro felt that he had little chance and did not want to show weakness, and tried not to shake with fear. He was trying to figure out how to fight such a powerful monster, using the red eye skill and assess the opponent's abilities. Oh, the loud and poisonous aura of this monster with a fan exuded hellish anger and power. A powerful and self-confident monster decides to deal with the boys himself. The monster with a fan shows his finger that he is very interested in what the boys are capable of, who were able to defeat his generals, and asks to attack him. Kajuro, holding his mighty sword in his hands, was confused and did not know what to use and how to attack such a strong monster. He decides to use the Red Eye's explosive gaze, but only by putting more magic into its power, thereby increasing the explosive power of the technique. The monster, dressed in a classic outfit with a fan, did not show any fear when he saw the mark placed on him. Using his magic, the monster, opening his fan, began to form strong currents of wind and showed his displeasure that the boys used such a pathetic attack against him. The whirlwind formed by the kimono-wearing monster's abilities begins to carry the explosive tag away. He rose high above the heads of the monsters. Kajuro watched and realized that his attack had failed. The monster in the kimono stood calmly and did not show the slightest fear. A loud explosion sounded over the city, and a bright flash illuminated the surrounding neighborhoods. The enormous power contained in the seal was used in vain. Kazuro, seeing that his abilities were very weak compared to the monsters in kimono, was scared and tried to come up with at least something that would help him escape. Khan, seeing that Kazuro was very tired and scared, asked not to provoke the monster, and it was better to try to come to an agreement. Meanwhile, the monster in the kimono was pleased and rejoiced that everyone applauded him and praised his power. Trying to be modest, he began to cover his face with a fan and feel embarrassed. Yui and his comrades were fleeing the city and heard a loud explosion in the direction where Kajuro ran. They paid attention and stopped. Seeing a bright flash, Yui thought that Kazuro was there fighting the most powerful monsters, and they needed help, but it was risky to act since there were few students left from her group. The guys stopped and saw a bright explosion and also thought that Kazuro was fighting and hoped that he would finally die and stop interfering with them. Yui thought that when they got out, Nada would ask for help. Kazuro understands that their strength cannot compare with such a monster and understands that they need to be more cunning and take advantage of the monster's weaknesses, one of which was vanity. Kajuro begins to applaud and praise the kimono-clad monster, which takes his comrades by surprise. Kajuro touches Po and asks him to applaud as well while he figures out how to escape from such a strong monster. The monster begins to laugh and think that the kids are observant, but naive if they decided that they could appease such a smart and strong monster. In an instant, the mood of the monster in a kimono changes, and using his magic, he waves his fan and releases sharp waves that strike anyone with their blows. Kazuro manages to regroup and realizes that nothing will work out for him, and there is simply no chance of salvation. Such a monster was very intelligent and was not going to let them go, surrounding them with his warriors and taking them into a ring. Kazuro falls to the ground on one knee from his injuries and begins to beg for mercy and beg to let them go. His clothes were damaged, but if he had not had the protective magic of a swordsman, the wounds would have been deep and maybe even fatal. Po also kneels and tries to help Kajuro. He hears the boy begging the monster to let them go and understands that even if Kazuro asks for mercy, they really have no chance. Po begins to cry and beg for mercy too and tries to grab Han's hand and force him to sit on his knees and also beg. Kan replies that even if this is his last day, he will never kneel before the monster and will beg for mercy. The monster liked this and was only too happy to start killing them in a humiliating way, but the fool who dared not bend the knee before the great monster would be killed first. Everyone heard the words of the monster in the kimono clearly and, looking up, they saw that he was beginning to increase his strength and release his sharp waves with the help of a fan. Kan, having taken a defensive stance, begins to receive many wounds from the sharp waves of the monster in a kimono. His shadow monster is capable of absorbing damage, but only against such a strong monster. Its absorption power does not help much. Kan does not give up, and after so many wounds, he is still not going to kneel. But on the contrary, he begins to ridicule the monster for weak attacks, suffering from pain. Kan raises his blade and prepares for the monster's next attack. Kazuro cannot get up from his wounds and asks Hana not to be stubborn. Sitting in hysterics and fear, he trembles from imminent death. The monster in a kimono decided to approach such a humble boy and, showing his respect that he did not give up, said that his choice was worthy of death. Releasing sharp and poisonous thorns from his fan, the monster in a kimono tried to hit the boy with the blade, who did not want to bow his head in front of him. Showing a furious roar and abnormal laughter, he attacks the boy, trying to cut off his head. Kazuro understands that now Han could die and asks him to urgently sit on his knee and beg for mercy while living for him. But at the last moment, a carrier pigeon with demonic eyes flies over the monster in a kimono. He held a letter with a seal in his claws. The monster in the kimono notices the seal and becomes afraid. His face begins to break out in a cold sweat as he realizes who the letter is from. The dove descends into his arms and releases the letter. The monster in the kimono tremblingly accepts the letter and releases the dove. No one had ever seen him so scared. The monster, with trembling hands, begins to try to open the letter, prying up the edges of the seal with his fan. He begins to take papers out of the envelope and read. What he saw greatly frightened him, and the realization that he had almost brought upon himself the death of the entire city and all the monsters was extremely agitated. He begins to read the letter out loud and ask the boys who they are, loudly and with apprehension. The guys began to suspect something strange. Kajuro, raising his head, replies that they are ordinary students from Fufel and have no idea what the monster is talking about. The kimono-wearing monster reveals a letter containing a photograph of Kajuro. The text below says that under no circumstances should you kill him. Kajuro was very surprised and did not understand who could help him like that, if he definitely did not know anyone from the high ranks of monsters. This was very strange, Kazuro thought. The monster in the kimono gave up trying to kill them, began waving his fan and asking how they know the greatest warrior from the world of monsters. But Kajuro didn't understand who he was talking about. A monster in a kimono, using his magic, shows an image of a great monster that is capable of destroying everyone in this city and beyond. He, a little nervously, asks Kajuro if he knows this man. Kajuro did not understand or know this monster, which made the monster in a kimono surprised. He had never seen the supreme monsters protect anyone so much, after resting a bit and getting up with help. On his feet, Kazuro asked the monster in a kimono if they could leave here. The monster, realizing that it is better not to test the words spoken in the letter from the supreme monster, decides to let the guys go. Kazuro, not understanding what happened and what kind of letter saved their lives, begins to turn around and slowly leave with his comrades from the encirclement of hundreds of monsters. The crowd of monsters parted on the orders of the head of the city, and without interfering with the guys, they let them go, following them with a hungry and angry look. The head of the city told his generals to keep an eye on the boys and make sure they left the city as quickly as possible. The monster in the suit and gold jewelry was also scared when he found out who the letter came from and wondered who this guy was and why he was being guarded by the supreme lord of the monsters. Meanwhile, the guys, having recovered a little, began to run along the road. There were many monsters around, but they did not attack or try to chase them. Kazuro notices that no one is bothering them and understands that now they can safely leave, and it was very strange. He held his wounded hand and was surprised at what was happening, remembering the story that his parents told him as a child, that there was one monster that led a huge army of monsters behind him and destroyed everyone in his path. His name was Insei, the great emperor of the Monster Empire. Han also remembered this story and asked Kajuro how he knew the great emperor of monsters. Kajuro did not know this emperor and did not understand why such a great monster saved them. Rejoicing that now nothing threatens them, he jumped and hugged the guys, showing his joy and telling them not to bother themselves. Now they can calmly leave this damned city. Kajuro agrees, but suggests visiting one more place before leaving. Meanwhile, his family went about their daily routine on the farm. Mom was doing the laundry and talking to her husband while he smoked his pipe. A girl appears outside the farm gate holding a full bucket of water. She walked towards them and notices that her father has arrived from the city. It was Kazuro's sister, Kihiko. She was glad to see her father and wanted to know how Kajuro was doing and what he was doing now. The bucket in her hands was quite large and heavy, which was clearly undesirable for a small and fragile girl like her. The father, seeing that his daughter was carrying a heavy bucket full of water, immediately got scared and ran to her. His daughter was very weak due to illness and did not want to exert herself. Fearing for his daughter's condition, he ran up and grabbed the bucket from her hands, showing his fear for his daughter's condition. Kihiko was very happy to see her father and, hugging his hand, walked with him and asked how he went to visit her brother and what Kazuro was doing now. The father said that Kajuro is now in a closed city and undergoing a test. Kihiko was afraid for her brother, realizing that it was definitely dangerous there and they could kill him. She remembered that Kajuro's absorber abilities were too weak, and it was always difficult for him. The parents began to reassure their daughter with the words that Kajuro had already matured and gained experience for such competitions. His absorber level rose, and he even had comrades. The father said that when he saw his son, he even helped the poor and wounded, saving their lives. Kihiko was very touched that her brother had become such a good person. The father, trying not to say too much, tried to change the topic. Otherwise, his daughter, due to her weak body, mostly sits at home and watches the news on the internet. She might suspect something. Kihiko behaved quite modestly and was pleased with her father's story. She was proud that her brother had become very mature and capable of achieving anything in life. Meanwhile, outside the wall of the abandoned city, at the point of the safe zone, there was a large tent from where light and noise could be heard from loud conversations. Inside, Director Lin watched the competition take place. Yui appeared behind her, having successfully made it out of the city with her comrades. There were many cameras in the city, and the director was watching everything. He wondered what happened to Kajuro and whether he could survive with his group. Director Lin wanted to know what kind of monsters he had absorbed and how many of them he had. The main task was to find out what he found in the crypt. Yui looked at Director Lin and was a little angry that he could not send his people to help seeing how monsters were killing students. Director Lin approached and grabbed Yui by the shoulders and began to say that he did not care about the fate of all those students, like her father. Their task was to find out Kayuro's abilities and understand whether he is dangerous to society. He told her that if he survived, they would find him and end his life. There was no talk of salvation. Having gathered his men, Director Lin begins to leave the tent and move towards the abandoned city to find Kajuro and make sure that he is dead. Yui, hearing Director Lin's words that her father also wanted Kazuro dead, began to suspect that there was something more than just fear about his strength. Meanwhile, in the city, the guys, feeling no problems and in a good mood, walked around the city surrounded by monsters, realizing that no one would touch them. Kazuro asked the guys to stop by another bank on the way and check it out. When they went inside, they saw many empty cells and were a little puzzled. There was no safe here, nor was there any money. Kojuro was angry that they had arrived too late, and someone had passed them by. His calm voice hinted that they would already take a lot from this city, so there was no need to worry. But Kojuro was a little offended, since this was a good chance to get even more rich in such a short time. He walked out of the bank door, kicking the stones under his feet. Suddenly they see a man falling from the roof. He breaks in front of the guys and it scares them a little. Kojuro and the guys were surprised and decided to check what was happening, and why were there adult absorbers here. Kojuro, with the help of his red eye, notices that there is a strong commotion going on the roof between the absorbers and the monsters.